There we go. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. I am Aaron Leffland, the Deputy Director here at the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, or CLCC for short. Oh, I just lost my notes. There we go. We are the umbrella organization for Connecticut's land trusts and support the work that you all do through policy, advocacy, funding, technical assistance, and capacity building programs just like this one. Today is the third installment of a four-part webinar series designed to equip Land Trust board members and staff with the tools and strategies needed to build a strong and sustainable fundraising program. CLCC offers many programs like this throughout the year, so if you don't already, I encourage you to subscribe to our e-news. It's a really great way to stay clued in on our upcoming programs. Just a few quick housekeeping things before we begin. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll have time at the end to address some of those Q&As, and Paul and Sharon, I can prompt you partway through if you're interested in taking a question break. To help preserve some of the bandwidth on the Zoom call, we just ask that everybody stay muted and keep your video off until the Q&A session. And also just note that we're recording and that we'll be sharing the recording and the slides with you all in the next couple of days. Today's webinar is titled Major Gifts Part 1, Don't Take the Yes Out of the Donor's Mouth, and will be presented by Sharon Danosky and Paul Dunne. Together, they've been working in the nonprofit and fundraising space for decades and together have raised more than $2 billion. So please join me in welcoming Sharon and Paul.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's so great to see you. And I'm seeing some old friends. I always love that whenever I do any presentation for CLCC. So we're going to bring up the PowerPoint now and we'll get started.
1 second, Sharon. I'm getting it right now. Yeah, Sharon makes me I'm her IT guy, which lets you know how bad shape we're in.
Yeah, exactly. I've got real technology problems. Here we go.
There you go, Sharon.
All right. And am I able to advance this or do you? Okay. Oops. All right.
I can do it for you.
Okay. Next slide. All right. So wealthy people say they don't give more to charity because they weren't asked. I want to share with you a story, start out with a story. Totally going to date myself, but this goes back a few decades to the Reagan era when Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House. I don't know how many of you have heard his name or even remember Tip O'Neill. He was a character. He was a congressman from Massachusetts, and he won by 70 plus points every single year, every other year when he ran for office. So he just had an election, and Tip O'Neill went to church, meeting with everyone, and ran into an old friend of his mother's and, of course, of his as well. And he said to her, "Oh, Mrs. Flaherty, so good to see you, and thank you again for supporting me in this election." And she said, "But Mr. O'Neill, I didn't vote for you." And he kind of looked at her puzzled and said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "Because you never asked me." That story is in his book, Man of the House. The important reason I want to mention that is that you need to make the ask. If you don't ask, you will not get funding. But there are things that you need to prep for. There are foundations you need to lay. There's some scaffolding you need to build. So we're going to go through what you need to do that in order to get to the point where you can do the ask. All right. So we want to talk about major gifts being about the right relationship. And the reason we talk about the right relationship, because somebody might know somebody, that might be a great door opener, but they might not be the actual natural partner you need to make the ask. So you've got to cultivate the right relationships in the right way. And to do that, we really talk about the four right rule. The four right rule means that you've got the right person at the right time, asking the right amount for the right prospect. So putting all of that together is a process that we really need to develop as you're going through the fundraising stages. When we talk about fundraising, we really talk about, being able to identify your prospects, people who you think can give you money. And the next thing, you need to qualify those individuals. Do they have the capacity? Do they have the affinity? Do they have the propensity? Have they given to organizations like yours? Are they truly interested in you? There are millions of people who have large capacity. But just because they have large capacity does not mean they're going to give to you. So you need to find, the right prospect by doing that qualification. And Paul will talk a little bit more about that later. You also need to ask at the right time. Oops, you can't
Sorry.
just jump into like, oh, well, you just met them and you're going to ask them for a gift. Guaranteed your answer will be no, or what Paul and I like to call go away money. Oh my God, this person is bothering me. They've never developed a relationship. I'm just going to give them some dollar amount so that they'll just go away and leave me alone. You don't want to do that. You want to develop that relationship, and that takes time and it takes effort. You also need to know how much to ask someone. You're not just, I mean, you don't want to ask too low. And you don't want to ask too high. Much better to ask too high than to too low. No one has ever, ever, ever been offended because you've asked them for too much money. And believe me, I've been in those situations. I might get a chuckle or a laugh, but they're never going to be offended. But I'll tell you a story at the very, very, very beginning of my fundraising career. I was working for a hospital, Women and Infants Hospital, and there were these two brothers that had started up this toy company. And this toy company was about to go public. It was an incredible toy company. Some of you might have heard of it, Hasbro. So we were going to solicit Hasbro. And, we'd done a little research. We hadn't done a lot of research. Fortunately, I was on the peripheral of this call, but I remember, at that point, the CEO and the board chair going to make the ask. And the ask was $400,000. We were building a new hospital. Now, this was in 1984. So, $100,000 we thought was a lot of money to ask them for. Literally, the two of them sat there and said, "We're really offended. We thought you were going to ask us for something significant." Well, that is the absolute most uh, awful thing that you can ever sit through, is being told you didn't ask for enough money. We went back to the drawing board. We came up with three different ideas, one for 250, one for 500,000, and one for a million, and they took the million. Ask for the right amount. You need to do your research. You need to understand. You need to really know what this person might be interested in, and do not shoot too low. Um, and so you need to put all this together with all the research you do before you go to an individual. So I want to show you, now what it looks like when you're raising a lot of money, and how we as consultants look at the fundraising process. Major gift work is about really looking at how much you can raise, and you're looking at it in significant chunks. When you're looking to raise $15 million, what you're really looking at is not that many number of gifts. If you look at this second column, to the left, number of gifts needed, look at how many gifts it takes to raise the majority of that money. 20, 35. It does not take a lot of gifts to raise $15 million. The largest amount comes at the bottom level, but the real money is raised at the top of the chart. And understanding who can give that gift, understanding their motivation, understanding what else they've given to, understanding why they want to give that much. In the case of Hasbro, the Hasenfeld brothers, they were about to make it to big time, and they knew it. They were going public. We did not know that. This was private information. Within, oh, Paul, we're not seeing your chart. I'm not sure why.
Really?
I'm saying it, and
Yeah, it's showing up on my screen.
yeah,
Uh, let me,
okay.
let me stop
It
sharing
might,
and I'll share again.
yeah, Chip, it might be your computer because I think the rest of us were seeing it. Anyhow, the Hassenfeld brothers were about to go public. You know, it was not yet known that they were going public, but they knew they were sitting on a gold mine and they were about to go public and they really wanted to make a mark. They wanted to be known, they wanted to come out. And so we did not really know that information. You know, could we have known it? Maybe not, but we should have known from seeing the growth of their company, for seeing how successful they were, for knowing how proud they were, for knowing that they wanted to make this mark in the community. We were an OBGYN hospital where, 4,000 births a year. You know, this was a big deal for them to do something for us. So, understanding that when you're looking at how you're raising money and understanding how money is raised, it's not raised from 25, 50, $100 gifts. It's raised at the, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, even the 25,000 gift level, because I understand a lot of you are a land trust and you're all volunteer, but donors want to give a significant amount to make a change. And the change that you're making in your communities is significant. You're impacting water resources, you're impacting soil resources, you're impacting the quality of the air, you're impacting quality of life, you're making sure a community is thriving. Many of you are on the cutting edge of climate change, ensuring that the trees and the water is protected in your community. And so your donors share your values and want to do that same thing. And so there are many of them that can absolutely afford to give this kind of money, but you need to know who you are, who they are, and you need to do the research. I want to share with you how money is given in this country. So this is the latest data that comes from Giving USA. Last year, in 2024, Americans gave almost $600 billion in one year. $600 billion. And look, 66% of it came from individuals. Well, that's a little bit misleading because 8% was bequests. Last time I know, a corporation couldn't leave you a bequest. Only individuals can leave you a bequest. 8% came from bequests. So now we're up to 74%. Foundations, 19%. I'm going to tell you, half of those foundations are what we call family foundations. Aaron, there are two more people who want to come in. Um, so those family foundations, really, some of them are absolutely a foundation. You have to submit a grant application or an LOI. There's a board. Your grant goes through the approval process. But half of them you can take out to lunch. You can have a cup of coffee. You can tell them what they're doing, and they have the ability to pull out their checkbook and write you a check. So now we're over 80% of this $600 billion comes from individuals. And so when you are looking at building a fundraising program, you need to build it with individuals, not with corporations, not with community groups. Those are all important for building the grassroots support of your organization. I'm not discounting that. But when Paul and I talk about fundraising and how we've raised together over $2 billion over our careers, we are looking at where the money comes from and how to get the money. And the bottom line of raising money is money. I also want you to look at where did the charitable dollars go? Who's number one? Religion. Now, that 23% is certainly a lot less than it was 30, 40 years ago, but it still makes up the majority of giving in this country. All right. If any of you go to church on a regular basis, if any of you have a relationship with a faith-based organization, what do they do every week? They ask for money. every week, regularly. They have regular drives. On top of it, they have year-long pledges payments that you can do. They are asking you for money all the time. And who is bringing in the most amount of money? The people who are asking. So understanding that you've got to identify the people who you are asking for money and then ask is how you raise money. I'd like to share with you before I turn this over to Paul a little bit of how, we go through this process of identifying and qualifying and then setting up the process to ask. So if Paul, you could move to the next slide, that'd be great. So if you look on the far left corner, this is, where you do the back office work. You identify your individuals. So, well, who are the individuals who are giving to you? Who are your members? What is your membership? Is your membership giving to you? Who are the members who are giving to you every single year? Who are the members who are increasing their gifts to you every single year? You take those members and you do some research. Today, there are a number of, excuse me, wealth engines that you can use to do it. You can hire a firm like the nonprofit group to do that research for you. You look at, who is it among your database and maybe among your community who have the affinity, care about you, who have the propensity, who are giving to organizations like you, and who have the capacity to give. And then you go to step 3, which is consultation. You can do that with a consultant. You can do it without a consultant, with your own board, with your own members in your community saying, who knows who has a relationship with whom. This is something that you can do on a grassroots level if you don't have the ability to hire a consultant. So look at this and say, all right, among these 40 people, are there 5, 10, or 15 that we might know that we can develop a relationship who might be able to give us 10, 15, 20, $25,000? I think for many of you, that would make an impact on your land trust. And so you go through that first process and you have a pool of donors. When you're working with a consultant group, that pool might be 40,000, we get it down to 400. If you're working as a single land trust, you might end up with a group of 50, 60 that you weed down to maybe 20 or 25. Whatever you prefer, you've got that group, that core group of people, and then you talk about those people. Are they really interested in you? Do you think that you can cultivate a large gift over a period of time? Or are they really just someone who wants to give you the annual membership? Or maybe there's someone who wants to sponsor an event. A lot of times when I'm working with clients and in the midst of a capital campaign, they might say to me, oh no, she loves us. She's been giving us a lot of money. She's only going to give you $25,000 for a $15 million capital campaign. She is not a major donor. She's an event donor. I just recently did a study where I met with some people I know very well, and they basically said, hey, we've moved out of Connecticut, we're down in Florida. We'll sponsor the events. We are not interested in doing a major gift. And so you need to, that next stage, you need to kind of qualify them a little bit more and then be thinking of what you're going to ask them for, how much you're going to ask, and then you start the cultivation process. And that cultivation process is one where, if done right, will lead you to a gift. And at this point, I'm going to say thank you. Does anyone have any questions before I turn it over to Paul?
There's no questions in the chat.
Okay. Oh, Pete.
How, let's say you have a person who gives major gifts. How often do you recommend checking in with them and make sure that they don't forget who you are and you keep them in the constellation?
Great question. I recommend 4 times a year, once a quarter.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a personal visit at least once a year. You should meet with them personally over coffee and tell them what you've done with their money. Don't ask them at that meeting. Tell them what you've done with their money. And then 3 other times a year, at least call them, send them a personal note, again, telling them what you've done with their money, sending a little email to them. I love land trust. I have to tell you, you guys are sitting on the best cultivation opportunities possible. Let me explain. If you're a domestic violence organization, what are you going to say to a donor? Come on to our office and see how we meet with women who have recently been, abused in some way? Ooh, I mean, it's really hard to do that kind of hands on. Hey, we've just opened up a new trail. Would you like to go for a hike? You guys have the best cultivation opportunities of any nonprofit out there. Man, maybe museums might be a little bit of competition, but basically, you just need to ask people to go for a walk. All right.
Sharon, if there's no more questions, I'll continue on. Is that okay?
Let's go.
If that's all right with everybody, I'm going to go ahead and go on. Hey, it's first of all, it's good to see everyone again. I loved being with you last week. Those who are there, you're going to get a couple of things that I mentioned because last week you'll hear them again just because development of that is that way. There's, Sharon and I always joke each other. There's a science to this. There's a science to fundraising, and if we each had a special little nugget that was made everything just change, we would use it. But honestly, it's just good hard work, and we appreciate the work that you're doing for us in the land trust area. So let's talk about how to identify major donor prospects. Where are they? What do you need to do? Some of you were there last week and heard me talk about the Abraham Lincoln story. I think this is the most important piece, actually, of the work that we're going to look at, is identifying these major donor prospects. And I shared the Abraham Lincoln story last week where they asked, Abraham Lincoln said to everyone, he said, if you give me 6 hours to chop down the tree, I'd use the first 4 to sharpen the axe. And this is what we're talking about right here. We're talking about sharpening the axe. So where are they? Well, the first thing you need to do is review your previous major donors that you've had and see what the relationship is and see what really interests them in your organization. Then you need to review the donors of any amount over the past 3 years. And you need to screen those donors because you'll have a lot of donors that might give you $250, but to another organization, they're going to be giving a lot more money. And you'll notice that. And so that just means you haven't built that affinity with your organization the last way. And then finally, review your database. You need heavy segmentation in your database. You need to do that. People are interested in different areas, whether it be the education that you're providing, whether it be, like Sharon was mentioning, new trails and new opportunities you're opening, but you need to really have that segmentation to where you know what they're interested in. Then also you need to look at alumni or congruent donor groups. In other words, has someone been there for a long time and been with you, or are there a group that they're part of that they came to your organization? A lot of times in campaigns, Sharon and I will have donor events that we have, small little living room events, or possibly at the actual property that we'll do, that'll have just a group, but they've all come together and they almost feel like they're an alumni class. So let's say I see Marcia's name here. Marcia has an event and she has 14 to 16 people there, and they've learned about the organization from that meeting. You kind of want to bring them back to that whenever you talk to those major donors. And gosh, I'm so glad I got to meet you at Marcia's party and that you were there and that you joined us in that. I had a donor that happened with that I spoke to that had actually given us a large amount of money at Christmas one year, totally out of the blue. And I talked to them about it, and she shared with me the story about how they went to her husband's Christmas event. This was for a homeless organization, one that worked with homelessness. And she shared with me they had gone to this Christmas event, and as they went in, they literally walked around a gentleman who was laying kind of in the gutter there in the cold weather in Denver, Colorado. And when they came out, he wasn't there. She said they went immediately home, took an old envelope that had come out of a previous correspondence with them, and they wrote a check for $5,000. And after she shared that story, I kept going back to her and going, you know, Kay, I know it was a horrible night for you, but I'm so glad because that brought you in to our organization and you've done so much good. And so really having that. And then finally, the piece that I talked about last week, I'm not going to go into this in depth, but I would encourage you to get the presentation I did last week, but you really need to look at donor screening. You can do those through two different ways, iWave or Donor Search. And what they do now is both of these types of screening companies, these research well screening companies, what they do is they look at three major areas. Capacity, do they have the kind of money that can provide for a major gift? And then they also look at propensity. You know, not only are they wealthy, but do they give it away? Do they share? Are they philanthropic? And so they do that. And then the third one is affinity. Do they have a specific affinity for what you're doing? And so that information, again, I shared that in depth last week. Please look at that one from last week. So you do it. So that's how you identify major prospects. Now, how do you determine the capacity and interest? Well, I want to share a quick little story. Sharon and I are both storytellers that we like to do. I had the opportunity to work with a gentleman that everybody would know here. His name's Gordon Moore. Unfortunately, Mr. Moore passed away about 3 years ago, but he was the founder of Intel, and he's chairman of the board for that. And he was one of my donors on the Big Island of Hawaii. And I remember going to see him. Mr. Moore had given us about $50,000 a year at the hospital for a long time. And so he had actually raised his limit to give $1 million, and he was matching the Hawaiian Medical Association, who was also giving $1 million to get for us donor records that we didn't have, to be able to have that electronic donor records that we did. And on the Big Island of Hawaii, at this particular hospital, if someone got hurt or something happened, they would literally copy all the information, put it in a folder, put it on their chest, put their arms across it, strap them in, and take them to Oahu. And that's just not real efficient there. And so we were going to be able, and it cost $2 million to do this. And so Gordon Moore gave the $1 million to match that million from the Hawaiian Medical Association. And I remember the morning I went over to get the money from him and talking with him. And so he, by the way, just as an aside, it was one of the only times this has ever happened in my career. In fact, it's the only time it happened. I came in and he goes, "Oh my goodness, Paul, I forgot." And he went over to his desk, pulled out a checkbook, and wrote a check for $1 million, a personal check for $1 million, like I would write one to the grocery store. And it just surprised me. By the way, I do have a picture of it. I've kept it just because it was amazing. And he gave that to me. And as he's handing it to me, he says, "You know, Paul," he goes, "I'll give you this $50,000 as I have as a taster. But to get this kind of money, you have to show me a return on my investment." And so as you're determining capacity and interest, you need to make sure, and Sharon does a wonderful job with your case for support, with your case that you have out there. You have to show them urgency and impact. And if you remember nothing else that I say today, remember that the two most important words for a donor are urgency and impact. Right now in Texas, and I know Connecticut has gotten some horrible weather also, but Texas, the camp that I went to in Kerrville, right outside Kerrville and Hunt, was Camp Stewart for boys, and it's just basically gone, right? And you all have heard the horror stories that are coming out of the hill country in Texas. they are going to be able to right now show that urgency of what people need. And you hear it every day that you're doing that. And so the one thing you have to show is urgency and impact. The other thing that you need to do is you need to take time to cultivate that donor. Find out what their interest is. Look at past giving that they have through different donor interests. Again, the game is won before you even go into the meeting. Build interest and relationships with them. Find out where theirs is. Do their homework. Do your homework. There's a lot of information on the public domain area that will just tell you. This information will help you determine not only the interest, but also the capacity. Almost every research tool tells you what that capacity is. And you need to know that. You just don't want to take a shot at it in all this. And by the way, past giving to your organization will be very helpful in determining this. One of the most important things we learned about planned gifts, and by the way, Sharon and I both always suggest to every organization that you have a planned giving part of it, that you have something in there for it. But you may have a donor who only gives you $100 a month, but has done it for 15 or 20 years. That is the perfect planned giving person and candidate to look for. So that, and then finally, you need to realize one thing, and I say it here a lot. During this, don't take the no out of the donor's mouth. A lot of times we do that with major donors. We'll say something to where, gosh, they just went through a divorce, or they've gone through, their spouse has had a long illness that they've had to deal with. Their daughter is getting married. We have these excuses that we give, and we really need to talk to the donor and let them decide. A lot of times these donors, I've had them that have gone through divorce, and they said no, they wanted that because they wanted to give a gift because it gave them a sense of belonging to something. They needed something to focus on again. One person who actually had someone who had a loved one who had passed away gave in their name. And we would have never been able to receive that gift if we hadn't done that. So remember not to take the no out of the donor's mouth with that. Next thing I want to look at is the wealth and interest quadrant. We look at this, and as you go around this is very self-explanatory, but obviously the first person, if you look to your left, the corner there, is high wealth and high interest. That's the person that you want to find for your major gift area. The next one is high wealth and low interest. Now, let me tell you why. We can't build wealth in anybody, but we can absolutely build interest. They may not know that different things that your organization does, the reach that your organization has. And so it's up to us to build that interest, or as we call in the business, that affinity to what you're doing. The third one is high interest and low wealth. They may have high interest, but maybe they don't have a lot of funds that they can do it. Those are great people as you're going through to come into your monthly donor program, annual giving, maybe buy tickets for an event because they're very interested in that. And then finally, the one, especially as you're doing a campaign that you're looking for, that you really don't need to jump as much into, is low wealth and low interest. And by the way, when I come along with those people and I talk to them, I don't just get rid of them and push them to the side. I say to them, I understand that our organization, what we're doing as a land trust, isn't, of interest to you. And I completely understand that. But boy, I would really suggest all nonprofits need help right now. And so I would suggest that you try to find one that really touches your heart, that fuels your passion, that you can get involved with. I think it's that old phrase, a rising tide carries all ships. The next one is how to determine the ask amount. Hint, just don't take a shot at it. I talked a little bit about this last week when I shared a story of Jakob Ben Wolf Kranz. But in order to determine this ask amount, you're going to need to do your research information that we talked about at the very beginning. You have to find that out. There is so much money. Sharon could tell you this 10 times over, how much money is left on the table because we haven't done that homework. We go to someone and we get excited because they're giving us a $25,000 gift. And then we look in and we find out that to their university or something, they've given a $250,000 gift, or they've given much more money. So you need to look at that. And it's important to determine and ask them out for each process, because that's how you fill out that gift chart that Sharon talked about earlier. We use that for everything that we do. We put together the gift chart. We put names in it of people, how much we think we're gonna be able to work out with them, and then we write that down. And you need to realize some of what you have to do in determining this ask amount is also finding out from that person what is their biggest interest, what really lights their fire. In other words, not everybody is so engaged in just your stories that you have. Let me share very quickly. There's a gentleman, he has a foundation, it's called the Anschutz Foundation in Denver, Colorado. Phil Anschutz was a wealthy person, owned Quest and some others, a movie theater. He produced a movie, if you remember the old Disney movie, Holes, he produced that movie. So has many, many interests, and he had this foundation. And I noticed that I had a relationship with them somewhat when I worked for an organization that worked for people who were underinsured or uninsured. So I worked for a medical and dental clinic that served those people. And so we had stories all over the place of literally lives being saved. But I did my research on the gentleman, Joe, who was the actual head of the foundation. And I found out the last 3 people that Phil Anschutz had become the head of his foundation were 3 CFOs that he had brought from Anschutz. So when they retired from Anschutz, he'd bring them over to run the foundation. And so in knowing that, I realized one thing. This guy was all a numbers person. That's all he wanted to know. He wanted to know exactly what we're going to do for the amount of money that they're going to give us. So I came in the door. I didn't worry about having all these stories or putting together this. I came in with balance sheets and budgets and everything for him to see how we were going to be able to serve a multitude more of people because of the money that they were going to give and how that worked out. And we got every bit of money that we had asked for from him. And he told me later it was because I came in with that and none of the other organizations had. And so when you're looking at this, determining an ask amount, you have to understand where their interest is. And then you have to make sure that you put together what I like to call a giving handle for them to be able to grab onto and understand what is going to be that return on their investment for that money that they're giving. Yes, the stories about what you're doing and everything help and how you're saving the area that you're working in, but it's more important to understand what that donor needs. The next one is who should be your solicitors and what's the role of every person. This is very important. I always work with, and I believe Sharon does the same, that it's best to choose 2 people to be the solicitors of the prospect. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is, you have a better chance of the prospect at least liking one of them. I know I jokingly say I'm an acquired taste. I'm very probably aggressive in how I work with donors. I really push forward. I obviously am a little bit louder and a little bit more animated. And if that donor's a quiet, subdued person, I'm not going to connect with them at all. But they might connect with the person who's with me, who is that person, who does talk to them. And so as you look at that, you have that. The other reason you do that is when you're talking with the prospect, you have a better chance of the other person being able to take some really good notes. And you'll hear more about why that's important as we go into this a little bit further as I go into the actual visit. But you need to look at that. And then also choose someone who knows the prospect really well and can handle the ask amount. Now, as I go through the actual visits themselves and what they look like, you'll see how that'll become much more important right there. I had a gentleman, I was working at this hospital in Hawaii that was wonderful. And they had brought me in. They had actually come to a stop in their campaign and had gotten stalled at about 16 million of a $34 million campaign. We were able to wrap it up in the following year and a half after I came in with them. But when we went there, I had a great campaign chair. Now, understand, Hawaii has the Hawaiians who they're on the island, but you have a lot of part-time residents, people that are only there from November through Easter, through April. And so they're there through that time, but they're the wealthiest people on the island. And they cared only about a couple things, mainly the emergency room. And so I remember that we had an appointment with a gentleman that you all would know who he is. His name's Mark Benehoff. Again, I'm not breaking any confidentiality. It's all public knowledge. But Mark Benehoff is the founder and chair of Salesforce. And so we had a meeting with him, and Joe, who was my campaign chair, knew Mark really well. He helped put together the deal that brought them public and everything. So we went to go meet Mark, and we go to a Starbucks in Hawaii, right along the water there on the Big Island. Now, by the way, if you ever get the chance to work in Hawaii, take it. It's a great gig. My job was always going out like that. But we went to the meeting and we met with them, and we came up like we usually do. I meet, Joe introduces me to Mark. I shake his hand, and then we sit down, and Joe goes into his spiel of why he's part of this. And so he starts out and goes, Mark, we've known each other for a long time. Listen, you know the hospital here and how important it is to us. And he says, and so we're doing, and he didn't get but that far, and Mark waved his hands and just stopped him. And so I was just sitting there, and I just went, oh, this is going to suck. This is not going to be good at all. And he just looked at Joe and he said, how much did you give? And Joe looked at him and he said, I gave 1.74 million. And Mark looked at me without a beat and just looked at me and said, I'll give 1.74 million. I was done. There's nothing I need to say because I'll goof it up. So I stood up, shook his hand, and say, thank you very much. And I was gone. I was leaving. They were going to play golf and everything. So Joe says, let me walk Paul to the car. And Joe is an older gentleman, really wonderful. And he puts his arm around me and he's walking me out to the car. And he just looks at me and goes, so what did you learn? And I just looked at him and I went, never to speak. He said, no. He goes, you can't ask someone to reach in their pocket further than you're willing to reach into your own. And that stayed with me. So when you have people that go out, they have to be people who have already committed to the campaign and have committed a sacrificial gift. So think of that as you go out. One of the things you might look at, these are some questions you'll see, but who are your top 5 donors that you could ask for a major gift? And how much do you think you could ask them for and why? And then this last one, who would be the right 2 people to solicit them? So think of that as we go through. All right, here's visit number 1. Let's look at this and what happens. So first of all, the purpose of the visit. What materials do you need to have there that you're bringing with there? Now, the purpose of the visit, you'll find out as we talk through this. The materials that you have. Then you need to ask questions, what to say there. And you need to do something that Laura Fredericks, who's one of my favorite people who wrote a book called The Ask, Laura calls it active listening. This is one where we've all heard the old phrase, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. This is one of those times that you use those 2 ears and you find out as much as you can. You need to watch your time and don't overstay. Sharon and I have talked about this. These meetings should probably never be more than 45 minutes, an hour at tops. And I mean, that's really pushing it, but they should be quick because you don't want to take advantage of that. So you don't want to overstay. And then you need to understand, what is your yes? Before you go in, what is the yes that you have? In all probability on the first visit, it is not for a gift because you don't know what you need to hear from them. You don't know what they're going to share with you. So your first yes is to set an appointment for the next visit. And I ask questions on that point as we've talked. And so if I'm talking to Pete and I say to Pete, listen, we've really enjoyed this time. I've heard what you're interested in this area, and thank you for sharing all that with me. You know, Pete, what do I need to get prepared for you for our next visit? So we can sit down and I can bring something back to you. And what do I need to show you in that will give you confidence to give a lead gift in this campaign? What do you need to see? And I'm that straightforward with it to let them know. I set the appointment right then. Don't go back to the office. Don't do it. You've gotten away from the excitement of the moment. Your yes for this first visit is to get the next appointment. And then after you do this first visit, I always write a follow-up snail mail thank you. I write that out. Thank you so much for this time. I'm looking forward to the next time that we get to meet on such and such a day. And I do that. But your purpose of the visit is to actually get information, to hear where they're interested in it, to find out more from them, to find out those little things of, I've found out in the first visit that they said, Paul, you know, I'm also invested right now in a campaign with the library. And so my pledge period with them is going to be another 1.5 or 2 years. You want to find that out because it helps you put that together. It helps you to say, when you bring back your proposal to them, they may tell you different things that are going on. We're actually taking care of my mother-in-law, Paul. And so, you know, we're busy with that right now, but this is something that I completely believe in, and I do want to talk more about it. I just want to let you know I might not be available. I've also found out in this first visit that I've gone out that they go, Paul, this is my favorite. I am so involved in this group. I know that you've put together a campaign committee. How can I be part of that? How can I be even more involved and introduce you to some of the people that I know? So there's so much that comes from this visit, asking the right questions and being available to actively listen to them. And then again, let me just say this one more time, to give them what is the yes you want is the yes to the next visit. So what does that next visit looks like? Well, the first thing you do is you answer the questions from the first visit that they had. They may have had some questions. Paul, they've been doing this and this, and I don't understand why they're doing it. You know, you're going to come back to them with hopefully all those answers. And I bring it back in very much a proposal form, a one-sheet proposal that I've put together for them. Remember, these are major donors. Major donors are just to the right of doing a foundation proposal, all right? Foundations want you to know everything. They want to answer all their questions. You have to do a report to them afterwards. These major donors are right to the right of that. They are there for you, but you have to have these questions. And so I put together that proposal for them. And I answer those questions from the one. One of the things I also do in this is I'll repeat back to them. I'll say, hey, Pete, you know, in our first meeting, you mentioned if we could show you how this new trail is going to benefit kids and how we're going to grow their love for the environment, that you would consider a gift. And so I came back with the information that you have, that you parrot back to them what they talked about on that first time through. And then you need to understand something. When you get the yes, shut up. And I know that's saying it in a horrible way, but nothing good comes after that. There's nothing that you can do. They have said yes and have joined with you. And I want to share this with you also. When you're doing that ask, when you're doing that, you need to kind of consider, I always try to say, I'm trying to get a person on the same side of the desk as me. All right. Which means a lot of times we have this, it almost feels transactional. I actually sit right next to the person in these meetings, in both the meetings. I talk to them and I try to visually have in my mind my arm going around them, they're going around me, and us looking out in the future together of what we're going to be able to do for this organization. And that's what you're trying to do. So literally, don't put anything physically between you if you can help it at the meeting, so there's any impediment there. And then also verbally, it's always using words like us. This is what we're going to do. You're going to join with us. You're going to partner with us. We're going to do this together, that we're going to do. And realize in these visits, make sure that you've mapped out who's going to say what in this. And then again, watch your time, don't overstay, thank them, and then go through with that. Now, how to make it easier for the donor to give the gift? There are a bunch of different ways, and you need to have that available for them, all right? You need to make sure that if your organization, that there might be a pledge period. It might be, and by the way, in pledges, you always get more money than you will with a one-time gift. A pledge period will help you put that all together. It will help you have that time to where a donor can say, gosh, Paul, I could give you $100,000. And you say, well, what happens if we were able to stretch this out over a 3-year period, over a 5-year period? Do you think you might be able to do something, more at that time if we can make that pledge period? Or if they say to you, and we've all had this happen, Sharon and I, well, they've said, gosh, I'd really love to give a big gift, but I'm kind of trapped this first year with some other pledges that I've given or some other areas that I'm involved in. I've said to them all the time, we can do that. If you want to give this $500,000 gift and you want to give $50,000 the first 2 years because of that, and then give $200,000 for the next 2 years after that, we can absolutely do that for you. However you need this gift to be crafted, we can help you with. So always offer that pledge period. A challenge gift. You will have a lot of times, or what we also call a matching gift. A lot of times we've had donors come in, lead donors that say, hey, I want to do this, but I also want to put it out there. I have a group of people that I want to see if they'll match me for this. And they'll do that for us. And we love doing that with donors. Make sure also at this point, this is kind of the area that donors start getting interested in, the naming opportunities that you have. That helps also push the gift to where you want it to be. Naming opportunities always aren't very good to get a people to give a gift, but they are great to get a donor to increase their gift. So if you come in and you have a naming opportunity for $35,000 and they had given 25, but then you start talking with them and they'll go, well, gosh, I'll give another $10,000. Well, if you have 40 of those opportunities, you can see how that money adds up. So do that. And then finally, cash or planned gift is what we talked about. This is a great time to talk about that, especially with those donors who have been with you for a little while. It's a way for them to leave a legacy for them and to give a much larger gift. And that's why Sharon and I include in the majority of our campaigns, we put in there a legacy gift or a planned gift that they would be able to give. So that gives you kind of this part through it. I'm going to open it up for questions. Everybody can come up, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen so everybody can come back on if that's okay.
So Paul, I see a couple of questions that popped up on chat that I want to get to first. Jen Longmere, you asked how often do you propose options like you did for Hasbro versus a single amount project? I think, Jen, when you're thinking about a land trust and whether you're in a campaign or just a major donor situation, it's sometimes good to have 2 or 3 different projects. If you know that your prospect likes, education as well as, maintaining trails, you can come to them with 2 different proposals saying, listen, here are a couple of options that we have. So, it really is, as Paul was talking about, listening to what the donor has to say and then going back and crafting a couple of options for them to maybe consider. In the case of Hasbro, it was all around the money. They wanted 3 options around the money, and then they would decide which option they liked based on how much they wanted to give. So that was their motive. With you, it might be education, it might be land conservation, it might be a particular project that you might have, it might be stewardship, might be any of those things. And
Sharon,
Joshua, and
Sharon,
Joshua
I
also,
was reading Josh's question,
yeah,
and what you just said leads into that
yep.
right there. Is Josh, you're asking how do you scale the fundraising from receiving exclusively small donations to larger gifts? One of the ways you do is exactly what Sharon was talking about. Is you've got to put together in these different areas that you have, you need to put together what I call giving handles. People just don't understand what it really costs. You know who really goes through this a lot? Theaters and art museums and places like that. They go through this problem, Joshua, because they are, people think, oh, I bought a ticket. So obviously that pays for everything that's going on. And it happens some in the area that you do. And people need to understand what it is. This is how much it costs to maintain a trail. And so if you want to raise that up, that's what you need to go to donors with, is very specific information that you know they're going to be interested in. And that will help raise the gift, because I guarantee you, we all on this call work for organizations. We know all the ins and outs of it, but your donors don't. And I hate to break it to us, but I joke about this sometime. Um, our organization that we work for might be number 2 or 3 in our priorities that we have, but in your donors, they could be 15. They have children and marriages and businesses and everything that they have. And so they just aren't as privy to this information. So one of the ways that you do it, Josh, is put together what I call those giving handles. This is what it costs to maintain a trail, to provide our education program, to what it is, and be very specific with those. And that way, you'll start getting people to really have ownership in that specific program. You know, there's 3 types
And
of.
I think, Paul, also the other answer to Joshua's question is really what a lot of what we've been talking about today, and that is looking at those small donors and
Mhm.
identifying and doing your research to understand who would be able to give you some of those larger gifts. So when you're looking at scaling a fundraising program from primarily 25, 50, $100 gifts, it's then identifying that group of 10, 15, 20 who might be able to give you more, and putting in a program where you're actually spending time with those donors. One of the things that we didn't share in this is what we have, the giving pyramid. Most of us work on the bottom layer of that giving pyramid. 90% of your donors, 10% of your money. What you want to be is 10% of your donors, 90% of your money. So when you're looking at that, you really want to be spending more time on the donors who have the capacity to give you money rather than on the lower end of the pyramid.
You know, Sharon, I just got off with the call yesterday from iWave, and I was asking them how many are, so iWave's highest rating are 3s and 4s. And I'd ask them, I said, so if I'm running 10,000 people through a database, you know, that I'm running through and looking at it, how many of those, what's the average of those being 3s or 4s at the very top? And it's actually about 15%. So you think about that. Think about that. That'd be 1,500 people that have major gift capacity out of a $10,000, person running. So you just have to realize that.
Chip, you've got a question. I love it. Do matching gifts still work? Matching gifts are not necessarily a motivator for a major donor. Um, it does work for your smaller scale donors. It is a, look, if I give this much, then I'm worth, and it's that whole psychology that if I join, then I can do more. And so on the smaller scale, it does work. But when you're talking to major donors, it doesn't work as well, um, unless you have a large match. Unless someone says, you know, listen, we're we've got to raise $2 million. We're $300,000 of the way there. We have a donor who will give us 150,000 if we can get another 150,000. Those kinds of things psychologically do work. I think what you have to do is really put them in the right kind of box where they're going to be more effective. They don't work across the board for everything, but in certain situations, they can work very effectively.
I know we're at time, Sharon, but I want to make sure if anybody has any other
So
questions.
Paul and I can
Yes.
stay a couple of minutes after, because all we're doing after this is meeting with each other. So absolutely, we can stay and answer any questions. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Any other comments?
Well, I hope this was good for everybody and that you enjoyed it and that you learned something from it. We can help. Obviously, I gave out my information last week. I'll put it again in the chat, my info, and you could reach out to us if you need anything. Sharon and I see each other way too much, so we'll be able to help you out. But thank you all again. Oh, and Ian, you asked, is it best to hire someone to do this for us? You're Ian, I feel like that is a baited question, and I appreciate you throwing that to me because we obviously do this for a living. So yes, it is good to do that, but it is something that you can do. And if it's something that you want to do on your own, as far as the research and something like that, which I believe is what you're asking about, you can get it on your own, or we do it for a lot of clients that we provide that service.
Yeah. And if you can pull together, a few members of your board or a few members of your land trust, to really look at this and say, listen, we really want to introduce and meet more donors who can significantly help us out, then that's certainly one way that you can do it. So yeah, the options are there. You can do it on your own. I think it'll be quicker and more effective when you hire someone, but it is something, and I know that many of you have limited resources to really spend in this area. So it is absolutely possible to do it on your own. Take some guidance from us. Some of you might want to join the Association of Fundraising Professionals. It's about $350 a year to join. They have an incredible resource library. Paul and I are both members. We speak at it. So that's another good resource. The Land Trust Alliance, it certainly has a lot of information on fundraising as well. So, there's resources out there that you can access in addition.
And I believe next week, Aaron, next week we have our last one in the series, correct?
Yeah, perfect transition. Thanks, Paul. Next week, July 22nd, same time, 10 to 11 a.m., we have the fourth and final installment, which is about capital campaigns.
Yep. And Pete, you had a question.
Oh, it was along the lines of hiring somebody, and maybe I missed the boat, but let me try it this way. Is it possible to hire an organization where you just give the whole project to, and rather than paying a whole bunch of money up front, they take a cut? So you say, okay, we're gonna hire. No, Sharon's saying no.
You
No,
can't,
we're
Pete,
saying
you
no.
can't, ethically, you can't do that for the couple reasons. But number one is ethically, Sharon and I have actually signed an agreement with the Association of Fundraising Professionals. If you have any fundraiser that ever wants to take a percentage, run away.
Oh,
Run
yeah.
away from that, number one. Number two, Pete, even bringing in someone as consultants, Sharon and I will very rarely do the ask we will do it at times to help train at the beginning. And like I'd go out with you to do an ask so you feel more comfortable about it. But, we're hired guns. You want someone who is there, who is invested in the organization. Now, the good thing is Sharon and I can train the heck out of someone to be able to do this, because you got to get yourself out of the mindset of it's this transaction. You have to understand, and I say this a lot, Pete, think of the time that you gave money away. Didn't you feel great when you made a gift? You felt fantastic. We get to be involved with people on the very best day of their life, the day that they're getting to help someone else or help another organization. So it's really got to come from the soul of the organization aside. Sharon?
And no one has more passion for your organization than you do. you know, so you really can't hire that kind of passion. I mean, good, really good professional fundraisers work for organizations they love, you know, because they can raise money for it because they believe in it, you know, and that's why you really want to train. So a good consultant can walk side by side with you and train you. But then the best part of our job is when we leave and you're doing it on your own. And that's what we're really meant to do as
Mm-hmm.
consultants.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that we had put our board through a training, and it was a modest training, maybe 10 hours total. And it was one of our major gift givers who also was skilled in this, gave us the training. And at the end of it, he said, so what do you guys think? Are you ready to go out? And one of the directors raised her hand and said, I would rather poke myself in the eye with a sharp stick rather than ask money for money. So that's why I was asking if there was a way to subcontract it out because there's
Well, you
reluctance
know,
to.
I mean, it's not so. I do think whether or not you have an executive donor, executive director, a few members on your board who are willing to do the ask, what I always like to do in terms of actually training board members is training them to cultivate and training them to steward and not training, not having them do the ask. Only let people who are comfortable doing the ask do the ask. Don't make it an expectation of every board member. But every board member, I always put it this way, you know, would you be willing to go have a cup of coffee with a major donor and thank them? And 9 out of 10 board members say, yeah, I can do that. That's fundraising. And that's what most people think fundraising is only asking. That's a critical piece, but a small piece. If you do the cult research, cultivation, and stewardship well, the ask is almost automatic.
Pete, if I could jump in and say one more thing, then Jennifer, I'll get to you. Pete, when we train people to do this, we actually train the board members just to speak for 2 to 3 minutes on why they're involved. So when they go out with someone, that's why we have a team of two. And Pete, we can talk offline about this and I can help you that, but we have them go out in teams of two. And so if I'm going out with Jennifer and I'm the asker, Jennifer comes in. It's like Joe's show and the story that I was telling that the guy went no when Mark Benoff did. Joe was just telling why he's involved with it. This is why I'm involved. This is why I love this organization. Everybody on your board better be able to do that. They need to be able to do that, all right? Because that's as Sharon was saying, one of the major reasons they're there is to share why they're involved and to let other people come along with them. But no, don't ever have them doing the ask. Jennifer, what did you have?
So, maybe 20 years ago, I got involved in my first capital campaign for my college in New York City, the Cooper Union, and it's a free college education. And they had a big campaign, and you're raising money for a place you love and that something, a place that gave something to you. And then the first thing they did was you have to see what it feels like. So they had the dinner meeting with me where they asked me for basically $25,000, which was a lot back then. I think I gave 5,000 a year over 5 years. And then they sent me out to ask all these other alumni. And I lived in Springfield, Mass, in Western Mass, but all of us had had this wonderful education at the Cooper Union. So almost all of the people just almost instantly said yes, and about what amount. And I was asking people for 20, 25,000. Can you give more? I raised about $125,000 and I'd never done it before. And
Yeah.
I made a video for them too. But I mean, so we're asking for money for a cause that we love. So we're not asking for money for ourselves. And not everybody can ask for money, but we're really asking for support for something we love. It's
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
not hard, I don't think.
And I think the other thing is you love it and the person you're talking to believes in it too. You've
Yeah.
got this shared values between each other. So, you know, what Paul was talking about at the beginning, it's not a transaction. It's about sharing values. And I love that, you know, very often when Paul and I do capital campaigns, you know, we recruit a campaign cabinet. And the first step the cabinet has to do is go out 2 by 2 and solicit the board. We all know the board is going to give, so it's a setup, basically, and so you do that, but they get used to what it's like to ask, and you go in twos, and first chair does the ask, second chair just shares the passion, and so it works really well. And back to your point, Pete, never put someone in a position where they're not comfortable. Have them be the thanker, have them be the cultivator, have them do some of the legwork in terms of the research. There's a lot that goes into fundraising, and every board member can find the piece that best fits them.
And Sharon gave us the best out for you because she said, in capital campaigns, this is what we do, and we'll be teaching on that next week. We'll be going much more in depth then. So Aaron, we'll leave it to you.
Great. Thank you all so much. Yeah, perfect plug as mentioned next week, same time. And we hope to see everybody there. Sharon and Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Something
Bye.
from these.